Welcome to this four-part series called Critical Thinking, the Geopolitics of Sustainable Growth. Because this is a series, we ask you to subscribe, hit the like button and the notification bell to make sure you get the next episode. We are going to be bringing you more of this international trade and political discussion to meet climate targets, and we'll have a number of interesting guests. Let us follow up now with Emily de La Bruyere. Emily de La Bruyere pioneered novel data collection and analysis tools tailored to Beijing's strategic and institutional structures. She has extensive Chinese language research and program management expertise. She has testified before the Senate Banking Committee and U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. Emily's work was the first Western analysis to document Beijing's China Standards 2035 National Plan. She is at the cutting edge of the U.S. analysis of China's military-civil fusion strategy and platform geopolitics, as well as their implications for global security and the economic order. She uses primary source Chinese language material to provide insights on geopolitical, technological, and economic change for decision makers. Emily is co-founder of Horizon Advisory, a consulting firm focused on the implications of China's competitive approach to geopolitics, and her commentaries have appeared in publications including The Wall Street Journal, The Washington Post, The New York Times, TechCrunch, CNBC, Bloomberg, and The National Interest. She holds a BA summa cum laude from Princeton University and an MA summa cum laude from Sciences Po, Paris, where she was a Michel David Weil Fellow. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Market Mindset. Here we are. We're getting a chance to speak with Emily. I met Emily last month at FarmCon in Kansas City. It was a real pleasure. She has some really exciting ideas and things to say. And I felt this is someone we need to speak to. How are you doing, Emily? Maybe give us like a bit of a sense of the intention here, what your thesis is and what your focus is as a business and just kind of overall like your main work.
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you for having me on. I'm super excited for this conversation. FarmCon was a blast, and it's great to be able to continue chatting about those subjects. I know you've already given an introduction to me and what seems to be a lot of kind of all over the place activities, but basically all of my work revolves around one fundamental thesis or assumption, which is that we as a world are in the middle of a new industrial revolution, and one where suddenly new resources and modes of using them are newly relevant. And at the same time as being defined by an industrial revolution, our world is also being defined by a new geopolitical competition. And that means that we're good. Not only are there new things that we're using in new ways, but it's according to new models. There's deglobalization happening. The world is no longer economically or politically operating according to the same logics that it has. And that's really exciting it's scary. There's a lot of risk here, but it's also really exciting in terms of potential opportunity as thinkers, as investors, and also out there for technologists and corporates who are creating new paths for themselves and therefore for the world.
And this was what I found so exciting because maybe to someone else, they think, oh, this is a lot of different topics that are disparate. I'm like, no, these are very focused. And I saw it clear as day because I've kind of followed the same theme to some degree, and seeing this culmination of like a power struggle over time. There was clearly indication of first a green movement, then an application of money towards it to a renewable. And then if people read history and they see, the foundation of a lot of finance is energy. Like foremost, whoever controls energy is going to have a leading edge, to say the least. And then you've got people who maybe don't want to give up that shift in energy, although it's happening. And then you've got political talk on both sides around those. It becomes overwhelming for a lot of people to look to see. They know there's chaos. They sense that something's up. There's also a ton of misinformation on all sides. How do you get through a lot of the clutter and to focus? And I know that you focus quite a bit on China, which to me as well, that's critical and that's key. Coming from a mining and a energy background, that's where my focus tends to be as well. The Russia issue that has hopped up with war there, then kicked that up with fertilizer, with ammonia, with access to uranium. Maybe kind of walk us through the politics and policies. And then also, before we forget too, not only do you have this access to ideas and policy and framework, you also have a fund that you're starting.
You made the point that you, of course, have been in this world forever, right? So you know that energy matters, and that's not new. But I think for a lot of people over the past 2 years, there's suddenly been this shift where things that we didn't think about are now part of household conversation. Things being energy, supply chains, great power competition, globalization or deglobalization. And these are all really critical elements of markets and economies and politics, but they're things that were taken for granted over the past decades in what is really a blip historically speaking, but became very normal because we as humans exist in blips. And that, I mean, that's the environment in which all of my policy work and thinking responds to, but also in particular, that I've set up and I'm setting up this new fund for. The general thesis is that suddenly there's new opportunity for industrial innovation, and there's opportunity for industrial innovation that operates according to, or that takes advantage of deglobalization and regulatory catalysts. There is so much opportunity for players who can come in at, for example, the upstream of supply chains and provide new solutions that are going to solve for either outdated methods or methods that rely on untrusted or adversarial production, for example, or on dirty technologies that need to be solved. And the players who are coming in early stage with solutions there are going to be defining an entirely new energy landscape, an entirely new industrial landscape. And it's an interesting point because obviously much of that is a technological question, but it's also a regulatory and political question. Because if you can understand the regulatory environment and where the political winds are, you can understand where there's going to be actual tailwinds and outsized opportunity, and how you can navigate that and best take advantage of it. So it's a point where having like a non-traditional background is kind of newly relevant for doing this work.
I think it's so critical, especially coming from a mining background, and you've written for like U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, is that people like us, even government officials say in Canada, they don't understand how long it takes to permit a mine, or to get a mine, to find a resource, say it's lithium, which is critical today, or any of the critical metals that the U.S. has deemed, necessary for the future. Is they don't realize it's really challenging to get a permit, to get a mine going, and to start extracting, even with the surgical expertise we have today. So I think that understanding of the policy and the challenges here, and maybe some of the, I've picked on China quite a bit. They get away with a lot that I would make the argument has given them a huge head start. Also, their focus on new energy early and early adoption was either a missed opportunity. Maybe we took it for granted. The U.S. is now, really catching up to speed with this is happening, we recognize this now, and maybe walk us through that kind of scenario, or how did we get here? And then you've actually, been in front of Congress. You've spoken to them of the critical need of what we're facing.
It's really remarkable how early and deliberate China's approach to the energy transition has been. And I mean, as you said, yes, I've testified before Congress, and there's been a big shift in the past 3 years, right? It's no longer a surprise to people that China is risks being way ahead positioning wise in the energy transition in particular, but really more broadly across emerging industries. And it's no longer an uphill battle to convince people that there has to be a competition there. But looking back at the history of how China has staked out this position remains really essential and really interesting. And basically, over a decade ago, Beijing said two things. They said, China has a disadvantage when it comes to conventional energy sources, namely oil and gas. And that's not good for China's position economically or geopolitically in the world. Second of all, there are new forces that are moving toward energy transition. And it's a much more even battleground on those. And China's legacy or actual mineral endowments low cost of energy, et cetera, do provide the potential for advantage. And based on that diagnosis, China started positioning really to win the energy transition. And in a way that has been supported or accelerated or undergirded by Beijing's centralized system and therefore ability to make long-term deliberate plays that might not make money in the short term, that a commercial player in a free market might not go for, but that a centralized government bid for strategic power is going to encourage. And so China started doing a couple of things, buying up critical mineral resources internationally that would be relevant for the energy transition, building up processing capabilities for those, both internationally and domestically, investing in new energy infrastructures at home and abroad. Like if you look at China's EV charging networks, they're so much bigger than those of any other player.
Yeah.
And investing in relevant technology, both by subsidizing its development at home, but more importantly, by acquiring it from the international system. Basically, China acquired, for example, solar energy technology from, it was way backwards 10 years ago. Chinese companies acquired the technology from international players based on subsidies, managed to underprice international players, put them out of business. Now China makes pretty much all of the world's inputs. And that just played out as a plan for over a decade and nobody noticed. And now suddenly we're at a point where basically every typical good of the energy transition relies on an input from China, at least one, if not multiple.
Yes, and it's interesting because I remember a couple of years back when they still have a bit of a stranglehold on vanadium. They did a very big price drop. They had kind of put Japan in their place because they came into their waters, and they flexed a few times in the short history, where that was a pretty good indicator to me that, oh, let's take a look at this. And I know you cover vanadium a bit and also rare earths. All these critical metals, that I don't look at that as being just a one-off. I've done a China report, which is certainly not. It would be a little bit more edgy, I think, than something you would write, but it's there on my website for anyone for free. It managed to at first get censored, then banned from those that were interested in reading it, because there was a group out here that wanted to put it to their Chinese Mandarin reading audience, and it was a no. But it looked at a lot of these things, pointing out a lot of these key issues of this, their ability as a government to long-term plan. And this is always a political bone of contention that, hey, listen, if I've got an authoritarian state and we have a 25-year plan, that's pretty effective in these types of situations where it's like, we're going to change the playing field from, a petrodollar to a renewable source. And I'm sure people in the West thought, you're out of your mind. It's never going to work. It's not cost effective. It's prohibitive. And now the kind of technology is ramping up. But not only that, you've got a lot of people that are motivated as far as the environment, that we have to do it now. And I think that that's where we're come to, once again, the political topic of the Biden infrastructure bill, and this is what annoys me, there's lots of politics in it, but it's time to do something, and quickly. And that's the part that I do like about it, is that let's motivate people to build again, and to not just roll over, because that would be a very, very poor thing for not only the West, but I'm pretty sure anywhere, if we just did that.
Yes. And I mean, I think also like the poor thing goes back to, your point about China flexing its control over critical supply chains. China's not just developing the kind of control it is over critical supply chains and industries for the sake of economic return. That's certainly part of the calculus, but it's bigger than that. It's for strategic return. And China's willing to use this positioning for coercive ends, to exact the kind of concessions or just boons for it that it wants. And it's shown that by Japan, for example, in geopolitical disputes, stopping exports of rare earths to Japan. It's done that by Australia and Taiwan with its market. And it's just very, very clear that China securing industrial power or leverage is about China securing global control, and in a way that is bad for any entity that prioritizes its own economic or political or social freedoms.
Absolutely. I mean, I saw just a couple years ago when One Belt One Road was spoken about a bit more. It's stalled obviously because of growth, but you see these tentacles reaching out. And even that I looked at, I'm like, oh, this is very reminiscent of things in the past that I've seen before. When you see this level of build out, and then the kind of approach that will go into a developing country, we want to own the land the port is on, but we're going to bring a lot of jobs for you and a lot of money and infrastructure. So of course, any country would be like, "Oh, that sounds reasonable. Yeah, that's great." But they're like, "No, no, we own this port. This is now ours, and then we own the infrastructure to get to and fro, and then building that out all the way, to Europe, essentially." That was my first indicator that, oh boy, this is not only a massive undertaking as far as infrastructure is concerned, and that would mean metals and mining and everything else and whatnot, but a literal spread of like a land grab. Like we've got a satellite now here.
Yeah, and a resource grab too, because of course that port is connected to the mine,
Yes.
where there's a Chinese company that owns it and is mining and then shipping back to China. Um, which also I think like brings up in talking about the Biden Inflation Reduction Act and any other industrial investment on the part of Washington right now. I think it brings up an asymmetry there too. Like, yes, there's been this great wake up, not only in Washington, but also I think throughout the Western world, that industry matters, and that there has to be reinvestment in that. And there's a role for the government in encouraging momentum towards that end. But at a time when it's like most important for this to be a multilateral and global project, it's instead been very fragmented and splintered, and in a way that risks helping China rather than hurting. While China has this global presence and this global land grab, the US and Europe are at loggerheads right now over their different visions of how you should support trusted industry. Um, and that seems like a very real problem.